Okay, welcome everyone. Really excited to welcome all our viewers today to Going Equipped with a Pen, which is going to be listening to some poems written by students from the Prison Arts Foundation. My name is William Redpath. I'm a John Hewett Society committee member. I'm really delighted to be facilitating this session today. And I'm joined by two really special people today. So first of all, we've got Pamela Brown. And Pamela, I think you are the writer in residence at HMP McGilligan, isn't that right?
That's right. I became the writer in residence in July 2015. So I've been there a while, although I was working in the prison before that, teaching OCN accreditations through the Playhouse in Derry. So I've been working within the prison for 9 years, and then getting the residency was amazing because I started to see like the impact that writing has and the place that it has in a prison environment. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna get into some of the Prison Arts Foundation work in a moment or two. I'm really excited about talking about that. And I think a lot of our viewers will be really familiar with the other guest we have today, with Paul Modern. But for the benefit of the small number of people that may not be familiar with you, Paul, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm originally from Bermuda, but I've lived in Ireland now since 2000. And I wrote poems. I'm always worried if people call themselves poets, but I do write poems. And I have a writing retreat in South Down, which is open now about 2 years. And I've taught at the Sheena Centre and at the University of Leeds as a creative writing tutor as well.
Awesome, brilliant. Well, I think really the program for this morning or this afternoon, depending on when you're watching this, we're going to be listening to some poems written by students from the Prison Arts Foundation programs, as I say. But really before we do that, I think it would be really useful maybe for some of the viewers to understand the context of maybe how you arrived at this point at sort of the beginning of August. Really from, I guess, a program that's been run a long time, Pamela, within the Prison Arts Foundation that we became aware of at the John Hewett Society, and that once we did hear about it, I think we were excited to get involved with and amplify and talk about. And I think it would just be good to maybe give the viewers a bit more of an understanding about that kind of work and what's been going on over the last few weeks as people have been recording their work.
Well, lockdown obviously has made that much more complex. Prison Arts is around from 1996, so they're there a long time, set up by the late Mike Maloney. But in terms of the poems, we put together anthologies, and we put together a magazine in the prison twice a year, and we have poetry pages. And I think it's always good when, particularly for prison writers, that the poems aren't going into a drawer. They're not just going, somewhere that they're not read or they're not shared. So it was through Fred Caulfield, who's the director of Prison Arts, that I heard that the John Hewett Society were interested in the work. We then had to select the poems, and we had a small anthology which you called there Going Equipped with a Pen, and we were able to take the poems from that. So there's some of the more recent poems that have been created as well. We had to get Paddy Nash on board. I don't know if anybody knows Paddy Nash and the Happy Enchiladas. Paddy's the musician in residence in McGilligan. So he, through Zoom, was able to record some of the students reading their work. Not all the readers have written the poems, but it was about availability and just the regime within the prison during lockdown too, who could come to the Zoom recordings. And of course, we had to work along with the prison to get all of that approved as well. So it kind of shows the support system that exists within McGilligan, that the writers group are given a lot of support by the prison governor and the prison staff. So to coordinate that took quite a few weeks, but it's great. It's really, really great that the poems are now being shared as part of your festival.
No, I think so. And I know you and I, Pamela, only really spoke for the first time, I think maybe 10 days ago, a couple of weeks ago. And you were at pains to tell me about the amount of work that people have put in to recording these poems, and of course we're so grateful. And I actually think that I put a thing on Facebook last night just about being excited about recording this with you both, and listening back to the poems. I think you've created something really special. There's a really good breadth and depth of different themes, topics, just levels of ability there, I think, as well. Just really good. So I'm excited to share some of those with with our viewers today. I think it's great, and you picked a great selection. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
And I'm interested as well in having Paul's opinion on the poems, because it's very difficult for me to read the poems without knowing the writer and maybe without knowing the writer's backdrop. So to have somebody independent of the backstory, I think, and to read them as poems, and maybe even taking out the prison writer aspect and looking at it as a poem for me. So Paul, I'm looking forward to your input on that.
Well, yeah,
Careful what you wish for.
Yeah, I'm not sure we can really divorce the prison from the work too much, because the content is so heavy in terms of what something else, and then about their experience within the prison, or how it's affected people outside of prison, or the future and what it might hold or not hold. But certainly across the board, there's been images or lines or particular words that have really jumped out at me, and I thought, wow, that's terrific, and I'm sometimes jealous of the image making that's gone on. But we can get to all of that, at some point.
Okay, so I think that'll do by ways of introduction for now. I think maybe what we'll do now is just listen to some poetry, and we'll have a bit of a chat about it.
I tell you what it means to me, shall I? And why the art of it appeals to me, how it soothes me like a therapy, and also it reveals me, the person I could really be, the person in my poetry, the good guy in the story, the hero of the second verse, the one who lived happily ever after at the end of every chapter. I'll tell you why I love the skill, my fingertips able to write at will, the sunrise of a brand new me, deleting all the unwanted history that caused so much hurt and misery, and then, with heart and soul and mind combined, rewrite the story of our lives, where peace and happiness and love are we all find together. I'll tell you why I trudge through every kind of weather, across the prison yards, past the wire fences and the cold steel bars, with the camera in my face, to the grey Groundhog Day and the monitoring of this place, yawning at 8 in the morning. I do so because I know that at the end of that walk, there's a keyboard with my name on it. I can type one till there's a flame on it, and edit it till I perfected it, and then share it with my classmates who say to me, that's classmate, here let me read you mine. We've got hip hoppers, we've got rappers, we've songwriters, poets and storytellers, a bunch of extraordinary fellas just trying to right their wrongs constructively with the help of a keyboard and a dictionary, a memory or two perhaps, a spark to light the flames of our poems and our raps about our lives and how we wind up in these places, these looks upon our faces, the afflictions we have known, the addictions that have grown, each of us a story of our own. That's what it means to me, that's why it appeals to me. See, it helps reveal to me the person I could really be, the hero in my poetry, the soothing voice like therapy, a happily ever after at the end of every chapter.
Imagine the possibility, if only you could, turn something bad or unsatisfactory into something good. That's called amelioration, okay, understood. Tend to motivate yourself, get into the mood. Being assertive is not being rude. If you want change, achievement and stature, well, you are the creator, the controller and the monster. So why not avoid the almost inevitable disaster and become a better person, smarter, stronger and faster. Stop lying about wasting away on the dole, sitting playing the Xbox and scratching your hoe. Life is too short, and before you know it, you're old, regretting wasted opportunities that you could not be told. Like a game of poker, it's all in our fold, and within your grasp are riches and gold. Let's take a trip down memory lane, all of the hurt, anger and pain. Retracing the steps, you ask what I gained, drilling the mistakes I've made into my brain. While I'm deterring myself with the power of seeing, you enjoy the most beautiful summers, offering during the harshest of rains.
Okay. So I just wanted to say that whenever I listened to those for the first time, I was just really moved. I think for someone that is, and maybe many of our viewers, somebody that is quite unfamiliar with the inside of prisons and prison life and what goes on, I think I was just really bowled over by some of the topics that were just covered in those initial poems we listened to. I think maybe just initially coming to you, Pamela, there, some of the things that people were talking about clearly and the value they placed on education, you know, the educational value of participating with these programs. I mean, could you maybe tell us a little bit more about the kind of support that's given to the people participating in these programs by the staff and all the people involved at HMP McGilligan?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I think your first three poems that you selected are really interesting, and especially the first spoken word one, because that guy in particular is very much a host. He's somebody who actually encourages other prisoners to come to the class and to come to the creative writing, and you can see from his poem the benefits that he gets. I think the education is very important. It's seen as a positive activity, and it's also a huge part of rehabilitation. The Northwest Regional College are also based in McGilligan, and they offer accreditations in literacy and numeracy and other skills like woodwork and tiling and computers and stuff like that. So there is a big educational staff there. Prisoners are assessed when they come in. I think for me, I know in the creative writing class, it can be quite shocking because, you know, a lot of these guys are leaving school when they're 11, 12 years old. A lot of them maybe have been in and out of Hyde Bank as very young teenagers. A lot of them are coming with, you know, that can't read. So you can see how education is going to open a door for them. I remember hearing a comparison, like if you imagine education as a map and you open this map and on that map you can't read, so where do you go on this map? But now you start to read and you start to add in not just subjects but books that you can actually read. Then you open your map and you can go anywhere that you want. So I think that really shows the importance of education.
Yeah, and I think there's another poem we're going to listen to shortly called "Learning to Read," I think, which is quite moving as well, and look forward to that. I think just maybe coming to you, Paul, and some of the themes that were trying to be covered by some of those poems. I noticed that regret was one that seemed to come up quite a bit there, and I guess that's something that people like myself that aren't associated or a lot of people involved with prisons. It feels like that's something that would come up a lot in prison poetry. Is that something you noticed as well in those three we just listened to?
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of backstory that goes into a lot of these poems. Not as an excuse or an explanation, but just more of a statement of fact. Really, this is, you know, this happened. This was my life. I am here. I am in prison now, and that's a large part of the power of the poems as well. And I think. I won't say that poetry is transformative, but there's a quote from W.H. Auden which I'd like to read. He's not often misquoted, or it's sort of out of context. He has a line that says, "Poetry makes nothing happen," but then, and people use that to say, "Oh, poetry is worthless; it doesn't mean anything." But they've taken that out of context of this passage. So I just like to read this passage first of all.
Please.
It's a poem. Written after W.B. Yeats died. It's a very famous poem. Mad Ireland hurt you into poetry. Now Ireland has her madness and her weather still. For poetry makes nothing happen. It survives in the valley of its making, where executives would never want to tamper. Flows on south from ranches of isolation and the busy griefs, raw towns that we believe and die in. It survives, a way of happening, a mouth. And if you put that in the context of the prison environment, from ranches of isolation and the busy griefs, the raw towns that we believe and die in, it has a different resonance when you put it in the context of the prison poetry. But it also explains, I think, why it's kind of a really important aspect of their prison experience. It's a way of happening. It's a mouth. It's a way of speaking, a way of expressing. And I find that passage even more moving. I've always found it very moving, but I find it even more moving now when I transplant it into the prison environment, really.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Amazing. I think before we're going to listen to some more poems in a moment. But was there any reason why, Pamela, these particular, you've sent me an anthology of poems, which I was really grateful for, but was there any reason why these 12 poems in particular were chosen to be part of this exercise, apart from just maybe the access that you had to these particular poets or people? And was there any other reasons?
Well, I think they show a variety of content, they show a variety of style, a variety of structure. They show that the prisoners are engaging not just with that act of expression, but also learning about the art of poetry, the techniques involved, and those kind of skills. So definitely when we were deciding on what to include, we wanted to include different, something maybe a ballad style poem or a narrative poem, or just like prisoners in particular like a lot of rhyme. They like poems to rhyme. I always find that interesting, and sometimes I'm bringing in Charles Bukowski and saying, let's have a look at him today and let's get rid of all that and just think sometimes about your content. What do you actually want to say, and how the voice feeds into the poem, So yeah, they were selected definitely for variety, and
very good.
Also to show like the personality of the prisoner, that kind of the regret and the addiction and the need for education, the themes that you identified from reading the poems. Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting, because I noticed that as well. And as you said, I smiled as you said personality, because that individuality really does come across, I think, across the different poems that you have shared with us. And I think we'll get into a few more now. I think we'll listen to some more poems now, and we'll maybe have another chat in a moment.
Once again, I set sail across the sea of field attempts, in search of a sunrise to enlighten these dark, cold days of night. Show me a way out, because it's not in anyone's best interest to dwell too long and say. A paragraph of pure passion, portrayed perfectly, promising paradise. I guess I'm still here after all.
Learning to read, learning to write. I was full of frustration. I had to get it right. I was full of confusion. I didn't feel that bright. I'm not going to lie. I was getting it tight. Letters from my girlfriend, I wonder what they say. They're coming in the post every other day. Does she still love me? Is she okay? I need to ease my mind, so I practice every day. I got a pen and paper and a few CDs. I blocked out the words and I listened to the beats. A mind full of rhythm, I write it on a sheet. As I think about home, the words started to flow. Scribbles on a page, only I know. Each and every day, my learning style grows. I never went to school, it could be worse. I can block out the lyrics and write my own verse. I'd bang on my door, I'd shout and curse. I was locked up in prison through learning, I'd leave. Always be creative and have self-belief. If you put your mind to it, anything can be achieved. As my book opens, my world is revealed. Life changes. The wind can change direction, and so can I. Life is tough, but I'm tougher. You reach a crossroads, right or left. One leads to death. I choose the death road. Only by chance, I survive. People can give you hope and put fire in your heart. Sometimes survival means losing friends, losing addictions, shock awakening through losing loved ones. I feel the death test, a new crossroads, a new perception. I take a new direction.
Right. So again, another type of mix, a real mix of stuff going on there. And I think one of the things that we had talked about before, Pamela, was the different levels of ability that people come into the programs with. And I think that poem, Learning to Read, just really pushes that into the forefront, you know. And I think it might have been Fred Caulfield that was speaking about this before, but I think he was just trying to explain about this kind of macho culture that would be in prisons, and the challenge that some of the students would have even admitting their difficulties with reading, because I guess of vulnerability, and they don't show that within prison. Is that something you would encounter a lot? Would there be a lot of challenges around sort of those basic literacy skills within the classes? You know, how do you find it?
Yeah, well, I think once they come to the class, I think they're ready to engage with education. I think maybe before that, there's a lot of masking. I mean, that guy whose poem there, Learning to Read, his girlfriend obviously doesn't know that he can't read because she's writing him letters.
Yeah.
So you can imagine how well he has masked that inability. And it's interesting that you have the Life Changes poem coming after that, because that's another example of a prisoner who actually learned to read. And he, at 15, taught himself to read in solitary in Hyde Bank, and a prison officer gave him a book to alleviate the boredom, and he was too embarrassed to tell the officer that he couldn't read. So he said to me that he knew the words when he said them out loud. So it took him maybe 4 weeks to read a blurb. And then he said he goes to the back inside the book. The determination alone that takes is really admirable, I think. And he said then when he starts to read the book, he notices he's getting faster, which is really interesting. I mean, I don't know if I could teach myself to read. I mean, I know we can look up words in a dictionary and you learn to sound out words at school. And I know I did learn to read at a young age, but I think it would be a huge challenge without like some kind of peer support to even do that.
Mm-hmm. I think that, you know, one of the themes that kind of comes up within some of those poems is the theme of loss. I think that like there's a challenge, you know, and some of the stuff that touching again on some of the mental health issues, you know, some of these guys are maybe experiencing, and it's just, I guess, coming to you, Paul, on that one, that would of course be a much wider application for some of this, for poetry and the creative arts as a form of self-expression. You know, deal with that kind of loss, maybe personally, or something that's going on in your family. I mean, is that something you notice within some of those poems as well?
Well, I think, you know, death is one of the great subjects for poetry, isn't it? I mean, it's constantly coming up, and poetry is a way of both expressing grief for it and the awe also that surrounds it. There's one poem in there that I choose the death road, which I thought that was an incredibly powerful statement, I thought. And if you look at that poem a little bit closer in terms of what it's going on about, there's actually a hint of that there's a survival through death. The death of addictions, the death of old friendships, which might have been brought in there, and the shock of other, you know, very close relatives' deaths as well, shocking you into a new kind of existence. So death, actually, in that poem, turns out to be a very positive thing. It's the result of death, as a result of death and thinking about death and the shock of death, that the new road is chosen. So he might have chosen the death road, but at the end of the poem, he chooses a new road. Of all of the poems that we're going to look at, that's the one that perhaps I thought was the most interesting in terms of it as a poem, because it does actually some pretty profound things in that poem.
I think so. I think so, and it kind of it maybe just brings me on to one of the other, I think, themes that comes out, and I think the wider stuff that you do with the Prison Arts Foundation, Pamela, around possibilities, you know, the idea of this sort of positive vision of the future, the arts as a form of rehabilitation, and thinking about how someone's life can be different. You know, Paul mentioned there about the death of maybe old friendships, destructive friendships, relationships, or destructive habits around addiction, and people hoping for a different type of future. Is that something that you think, or you find that comes up a lot within classes, people engage with that because they're hoping to do something different?
Yeah, well, I think the poem kind of, and the act of writing the poem can kind of gives a kind of space to self-reflect. And I actually, it's amazing, Paul, how accurate you are with that Life Changes poem. And I choose the death road. I mean, I still can't read that line without feeling overwhelmed by it. It's an amazing line. Yeah, so you can see that kind of being able to self-reflect within a poem, and helps that idea of self-awareness as well. I mean, if you're not aware of your behavior, how can you change? You know, if you're not aware of repeating patterns, how can you change? So I think it gives you a space to just, even we're just writing list poems, you're still kind of working with ideas and drawing out. So I do see the arts as transformative, you know, I definitely, and I've seen that within the classes, behaviour changes. And that would even go back to prison staff would tell you that, you know, that they see changes in prisoners who definitely engage with the class and stay longer in the class.
Very
Without
good.
a doubt, yeah.
And I noted that one of the things you'd written to me about was how popular the classes had been in general, and, you know, waiting lists and all sorts. And I guess that for a lot of people that have come through the class and come through the prison system and go through that whole just general rehabilitation, do you find that because you've got these people that come out of the other side and they're almost positive examples, I guess, of what can be achieved, I think that encourages more people within the prison system to become involved with the programs?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, you know, as well, you know, poetry doesn't have to be something big, you know, but something small can actually say something big. And sometimes it's about coming to the class to write a poem for Mother's Day. Sometimes it's about coming to the class to write a poem for Valentine's Day, to write a poem for a child's birthday, to write a poem for your grandmother. So you're working with memories, and so you can really write a poem about anything. But the bigger picture there is that it's about communication and keeping that bridge for prisoners with their families, because they're very, very isolated from them. I mean, that's the nature of prison. But that kind of connection with their families is very, very important. Yeah, I think,
very
you know.
Good. Very good. Okay. Well, I think we're gonna
poetry rooms, I think. And in fact, oh, sorry.
No, I was gonna put some more poems on, Paul. Go right ahead. By all means, go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to say, poetry is a house with many rooms. In fact, stanza is an Italian word for room. And, you know, there are poems that are very academic and very dense and years of exploration in order to understand what they fully mean. And then there's the more direct poem, which appeals to a great deal wider audience, really. But one isn't necessarily better than the other. You know, they both have intrinsic values, and it doesn't mean a simple poem doesn't mean that it can't be as profound and as complex as one of the more rarefied poems that we might experience within sort of academia, for example. And there's no reason that a poem like that Death Road poem can't be considered as profound as something that is, in the wider context, considered to be great poetry.
Yeah.
Both have their value.
And I think it was just one of the really interesting things about doing this event, because we thought that it would provide that kind of unique insight into the world of prisons, and something that a lot of people didn't know about. So again, yeah, that's maybe why it can be so profound, because it is giving us that window. We'll listen to some more poems now, guys, I think, and we'll keep going.
My hometown, wee streets with cobbles so dark and so grey, street lamps all busted from rats and afraid. Old dolls with trolleys are rushed off their feet, searching for bargains to make tight ends meet. A big pot of stew on a wet winter's night, slipped into big bowls for families just right. The heel of a loaf to soak up the juice, pass me the HP at dinner time first. Who's up for seconds? My wee ma would shout. Get back in line, son, and she'd give me a flout. The old days in Belfast I remember so well. The rats and the troubles, we were dragged up through hell. We grew up with nothing, no materialistic things, but in Belfast in them days, we did live like kings. Behind the walls and fire fences, the locks and razor wire, a young man walks to writing class and his youthful heart on fire. He's learned to write good poetry and he has a girl at home, and his love flows through the keyboard as he writes his girl a poem. He wrote it in his cell last night while listening to their song. True love is in the words he writes. He says it won't be long till the gates are opened wide and he wants her to be there, a smile upon her luscious lips and sunlight in her hair. In all the grey and loneliness where every man's alone, the young man walks to writing class and writes his love a poem.
It's like a song played over and over again. It's like a movie that you watch every night. It's like a bird that's always in flight. It's like having the same meal 3 times a day. It's like having a pain that won't go away. It's like a fish that doesn't leave the bowl. It's like a gambler who's always on a roll. It's like a soul that's always tired. It's like starting a new job just to go far. It's like a sheep that doesn't leave the flock. It's like waking up to the same alarm clock. It's like walking the same route every day. It's like saying the same thing that you always say. It's like a dog chasing its tail. It's like going through life just to fail.
Right. So I think that one of the interesting things, and what we just been discussing previous to listening to those poems, was the kind of the background and the opportunity to get a bit of a sense of where people are coming at it from. And I noted that I know you really love that poem, Pamela, which just talks about that kind of youthful heart on fire and then some of those possibilities that we discussed. I think that's, to me, that just is very, very powerful. It speaks about someone there that's maybe being introduced to poetry for the first time, maybe creative arts for the first time, and how that's kind of revealed something for that person. Is that how you find it?
Aye, and that poem always makes me smile as well, because his line, he's learned to write good poetry, and that's, I think, goes to my teaching.
Thanks to you.
and I think it's such a lovely compliment, and that line really does make me smile. That there's good and bad poetry, and he's learned to write good poetry.
Very good.
But I think that's beautiful, and again, that's another poem about encouraging somebody else. This guy has been at the class and he sees a young guy coming along, and he's writing, like I was saying earlier, that connection with family and girlfriends are so important, and the poem can keep that communication open. So you can see that as well. And as well, there's the description of the prison, like the grey and the wire fences and the razor wire, and then the poem is nearly the light within all of that.
Very good. Wow. Again, Paul, just coming to use maybe some of the themes around that, and I noticed that the poem Repeat, the third one we listened to there, where the author was just talking about that kind of the repetition, the monotony maybe that we would associate with prison life. I mean, as you could see some of those things around mental health in particular coming out of that, and using poetry as a way of dealing with that. Is that something you've come across in other types of poetry as well?
Yeah. Sorry, Paul.
Paul, go ahead.
That poem in particular, it's like a song, or it's like something. It's kind of a list poem, and it's a kind of creative writing exercise in some ways to think of similes. So you don't actually name the thing that you're talking about, but you say it's like this, it's like that, it's like this. This can be very effective. And some of those things he comes up with, I mean, not all of them are incredibly unique or earth-shattering, but there are some which are absolutely, it's like a movie you watch every day. A bird that's always in flight. There's some beautiful ways of expressing what it must be like to be incarcerated in that poem, and it works very effectively. And it's in the detail of this, in the imaginative use of the simile in that. And I think there's detail. I mean, I'm not sure if it's the same chapter about life changes in my hometown and the one about learning to read, but his use of detail in that is amazing. And in my hometown, that poem, the heel of a loaf to soak up the juice. There's just wonderful uses of detail in that poem, which really bring it alive. And one of the first things, if you take a creative writing master's class, or whatever, or introduction to creative writing, one of the first things the teacher will say to you is that you want to get rid of all the abstract nouns and just concentrate on the detail of the poem, the very specific detail. It's true, it actually does help to bring the poem to life. And that my hometown one was just brilliant. The old dolls with trolleys are rushed off their feet, searching for bargains to make ends meet. It's absolutely painting the picture that is, it's his childhood, and these are the details he's picking out and remembering. It's brilliantly done.
Yeah. I think at both times there's, and you can maybe tell us a bit more about that, but in both instances there, in that particular poem, My Hometown, there's a kind of a discussion there about the poet's background, and being realistic about what their background was and painting a bit of a picture of Belfast at that time, but also that kind of longing that Paul mentioned there, around some of those really specific details, dinner time with family, living like, feeling like you were living like a king. I mean, do you kind of like, do you talk about that kind of contradiction much with prisoners? I mean, they both are able to be honest about their kind of background and some of the stuff they were growing up with, but also feel as if there's a kind of a longing or nostalgia for it.
Yeah, well, I think that maybe you could tell that this is an older prisoner that has written this, because you do get a sense of time from that poem, and it is nostalgic. There's no doubt about it. And again, it goes back to the importance of family, and he's nostalgic for that kind of feeling of being part of a clan. He uses the word kings even there, within the poem. So that's lovely. The last poem, I think you're right, Paul, when you say that is a creative writing exercise, and that use of anaphora is kind of a good way to engage a prisoner who maybe has never written a poem before, but just tell me a list of what it's like to be incarcerated, what's it like? And it can kind of draw out, and you always get these 1 or 2 or 3, 4 beautiful images that just stand out and communicate something. I like working with the image because, again, it's about creating that kind of safe space. So you're working with simile or metaphor where you can express something that maybe to say it directly you're not ready to yet as well. So I think that comes across maybe in some of the poems also.
One line in particular from that poem, it's like starting a new job just to get fired.
Yeah.
I mean, how that just kind of sums up an entire background, an entire life, an entire history of frustration and I think it's just brilliant. It's just a terrific similar.
Yeah, and how he ends it, it's like going through life just to feel like he doesn't see like any hope in anything really. Everything's just repeating patterns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask Pamela as well? Just some people might be curious about. So there's different types of authors and different people involved in this. I take it that there's people that engage with this program that are maybe within the prisons for longer periods of time than others, and maybe those, and based on maybe how long. I just think of that repetition one there. That's maybe
Yeah.
someone who's going to be in prison for a longer period of time, maybe, than someone that's maybe just going to be in.
Yes.
Yeah, but that would,
Yeah.
so you would have different types of people. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it could be somebody that's maybe on remand or somebody that's waiting to be sentenced, or yeah, so they know that they're going to go through the whole thing again. And often as well, you'll hear people talking about it, prisoners can become very institutionalized.
Yeah.
So, and that was something that I learned very quickly when I started working in prisons. When you would see a prisoner coming back, you'd actually think they would be depressed about the fact, and I'm sure it is, a lot are, but some would actually be relieved. And that was quite a shock. So you start to kind of learn what being institutionalized really means.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a challenge there about how do we kind of yeah, I guess address that, and people that are maybe entering the prison system underage, is hide bank and that type of thing, and then spend a lot of time during their life in prison, and seeing people come back, and I guess some of those themes are picked up on in those poems about going through this again and again, and going through life to feel, I guess, is very powerful. I think really moving.
Absolutely. So you start to see that engaging with education is really important, but not just important while in prison, but that support needs to be there when you leave prison as well. And I know that's something that PAF also do, is they have like mentoring programs, and you can see the importance of those once a prisoner leaves, that they don't just have something for the duration, because in order to change, you have to go out to an environment that changes as well, like going back to the life changes, Paul, the poem, where you were saying you can see that this guy has rejected addiction and he's rejected friends, knowing that is part of making the change. So support systems have to be in place afterwards as well. Yeah.
And there haven't been a huge number of cases, but there have been instances where prisoners have come out and done very well. So this has been a springboard to people being quite successful in some cases, as well as that in the big one.
Yeah, absolutely. And in America in particular, you see writers like Etheridge Knight, who's an amazing poet. He was a prison poet. There's a poet called I think Johnny Santiago Baca, and he actually couldn't read and write at all when he went into prison, and when he came out 5 years later, he was like one of the leading lights in American poetry. So definitely Arthur Koestler as well set up the Koestler Trust, which is a huge kind of thing in the life of a prisoner, because you can submit your work to that and it's appraised by artists. And they always get amazing people to curate those, their yearly awards. I know Carol Ann Duffy has done it, and people like Grayson Perry. So it's also art as well, visual art as well.
Yeah.
So,
sorry,
I was just
one
very
quick thing. Serendipity is very strange, because Terence Hayes, who we had reading for us along with Mona Murphy, he's a young Black American poet, and one of his heroes is Etheridge. He's written a sort of biography series of essays on Etheridge Knight as well, and his importance in the whole expression of what it means to be a Black man in America. It's a tremendous book.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. I think, but all I was going to mention there is that there's a reason why, regardless of whether they've been in the prison or not, but people that have gone through and experienced some sort of hardship in their lives, are able to come out and express, be very successful within art, music, poetry, whatever. And I guess people that experience prison and that form of hardship is no different. So I totally believe that people can come through this system and forge something really special, on the other side, which is, potentially really exciting for for people doing that. And you've got great mentors, I think, as well. People that have kind of come through, haven't you, Pamela, through the system, and are, as you mentioned earlier, kind of be that kind of good example, I guess. What
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah, I know PAF and Belfast have a space that they use where prisoners can meet and, you know, talk about their work and engage with other artists as well. So
very
all
good.
of that is important. I mean, definitely, and the support for that is really important, you know, I think as well.
So, yeah, we might touch on that in a moment, but okay, well, I think we're going to listen to some more poems now. So we've got 3 more to go. So we'll listen to those now.
It's an unseen verse of an endless rhyme. Without it, we cannot even begin the first line. It can be described as a sleepless dream, even though it's not heard, not even felt or seen. We all feel the urge to look at a clock, see its face and hands, listen to its tick-tock. It's an unfelt thirst for a drink so fine. Without it, the grape never becomes the wine. It can be described as heat from the sun's beam, even though it's not heard, not even felt or seen. We all feel the urge to look at a lock, hear the key as it turns click-clock. It's an unheard voice in a pantomime. Without it, we'll never hear the shrill grapevine. It can be described as the eye and keen, even though it's not heard, not even felt or seen. I really doubt it, even if we wrote about it, we can never really understand time.
The desperate bargaining and pleading, denial and anger building, to a crescendo of angst, the slow erosion of self-respect, carried by the wind like litter, coming in and out of jail, like the tide at McGilligan's shore. This sad inevitability is the worst fate.
Oh, how your eyes have viewed my soul, peering to the skies, saved from rain, wind and even snow. Translucent are the reflected emotions of prevailing season. It's transparent as my thoughts begin to reason. Open your mind and I will close your sight, with curtains of fear that escape the night. I feel no draught, just peace of mind, no escaping the feet, the colourful kind. Your frame shakes to the sound of thunder, as lightning strikes I begin to wonder. If I can see through your protective blaze, can you navigate through my dying heart's maze? Like the sweet smell of spring's first flower, left ajar, love's not lost, it still has power. But in the end, I want you to know, it's the sands of time that make you window.
So, like, again, like, just have to congratulate you, Pamela, on just the variety of things that you've been able to share with us across those poems. Like that first one, Time, there, something that we all would associate with spending time in prison and doing your time and everything else. And I think that just really brought that to life. On some of the stuff around, like looking at the clock, looking at the lock, you know, that stuff is very powerful.
Yeah, and you find that's definitely a theme that's repeated within poems, as the concept of time, and how it kind of moves. Very different. I mean, there's, you know, there would be issues about, like, I suppose you're in like a bubble in a lot of ways. Life goes on outside, but you don't see it continuing outside. And it's even time around issues like grieving. If you're in prison and you lose a family member, like that grieving process is something that you do together. But even something like grief has to go on hold and kind of stop within the prison environment, you know. And earlier, you know, you were talking about showing emotion or being macho or that kind of thing. So prison in particular is a very difficult place to grieve, I think. And we don't imagine that prisoners lose people, but life goes on and time goes on outside of that.
Yeah. Paul, I just wanted to ask you about the third poem there, Window. Real allegorical sort of explanation of that, and I just want to know your thoughts on that one, and what you think.
I thought the last line in particular was really very special, because sands of time make you window. And of course, glass is made from sand. So the sands of time are actually, in this poem, literally making the window. It's the sand that makes it. But of course, you also have the double meaning there of the sands of time. You know, the drip, drip, drip nature of time passing slowly and monotonously, and the only thing left is the window. And it's Oscar Wilde who wrote that amazing poem, huge long poem, when he was in jail, about his tiny square of blue, the window that he saw through. So there's even that sort of that connection from this unknown prisoner in this jail to the great Oscar Wilde writing a poem about the little square of blue that was his fixation as well. So there's that literary conversation going on unconsciously, but it's still happening.
Incredible. Yeah, and there was another just nugget, I guess, there, and when the wind blows through the barbed wire, and the author describing, the author describing the sad inevitability as the worst cage. And Paul, again, maybe just like if you could just discuss that. Just
well,
really
I mean,
powerful.
the title alone is just wonderful, because it's, you know, it reminds me of the wind that shakes the barley and all that sort of stuff. The wind that blows through the barbed wire is a terrific title. And there's one, carried by the wind like litter. You know, that's great. And coming in and out of jail like a tide on McGilligan shore. Wonderful. Now that is just, you know, as I said at the very start of this, there are lines in each of these poems that really jump out at you as being very, very good in terms of their image making. If every line in the poem isn't necessarily working amazingly well, there's always one or two instances in each poem you think, wow, that shows real promise, that shows real talent. And it's not a sense, I don't think it's a sense of it being an unconscious thing that's come through. I think it's the idea of craft, of thinking about what they're actually writing and putting on the page. So I don't think this is accidental. And I think some of these, or most of them, all of them are highly crafted and worked on by the people who are writing them. And some, as I say, some of the results are tremendous.
Interesting. And Pamela, do you find that it's just about drawing out some of those things and finding a way to help the students express that in those ways and frame them in those ways? Do you find that you have to tease that out, or just find it happens quite naturally?
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, working with an image becomes very important, because that helps draw it out. And definitely writing everything you feel around that image, and then going back and looking at what works, what line maybe doesn't belong there. So you're teaching editing skills as well, which are really important when it comes to your poem and wanting a line to belong in a poem, I think.
Yeah, and those kind of skills, do you find then the people writing them become quite forensic with their poetry? Are they're able to kind of take that on themselves, do you think?
To a certain extent. Sometimes it depends on the personality, but there's a lot of peer sharing that goes on. They like reading out to each other in class, or even reading to each other in the prison yard. You'd be amazed at they'll come back with feedback from other prisoners on the wings, you know, about something that they've written. And so, you know, the idea of a prisoner writing poetry might be a bizarre concept, and maybe the two don't seem to go hand in hand, but poetry seems to have, I think, partly because it is language fragmented, and if you have difficulties with literacy, sometimes poetry is easier to engage with, because you don't have to worry about your full stops, or, you know, just the way you would write a sentence structure, the way you would if you're writing prose. So I think maybe that's why it can be the kind of much easier just than writing short stories or a novel or a bigger project.
And Paul, sorry, Paul, I was going to ask you if you would agree with that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to get too grand about it, but I think it was Eliot who said we was asked to define what poetry was, and he said it's an interrogation of language. And I think that's a very, very good way of putting it. And I think the word interrogation is a very loaded word, especially in the prison context. But I think there's a sense that if you're interrogating language, you are by default, by necessity, also interrogating yourself, and how you use language and what you're putting on the page. So I think there's a self-examination involved in the very act of writing a poem, even if it's not about you directly. There's only one of the poems, I think, that was actually addressed to a third person, to that young man walking across the courtyard on his way to the creative writing class. And that was interesting in its own right, that he stepped outside of himself to look at someone else, and to talk about them. But that's a form of interrogation as well. Your perception of life and the way you use language is an interrogation. And I think, is there a more legitimate way of using that sort of interrogation than when you're alone in prison thinking about yourself and the others around you and what's brought you there? You're interrogating yourself through poetry. Brilliant.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you, Paul. I just want to ask Pamela before we finish as well. Just, I know you were itching to say something earlier, but just about the work that goes on with the Prison Arts Foundation, and I think if you wouldn't mind sharing just with our viewers today about how important it is to support the arts within the prison system and kind of your views on that. We'd be really interested to hear.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know that the arts isn't necessarily for every prisoner, but it definitely has a place where it belongs. And I mean, there's one prisoner even within the visual arts who now is out and has his own studio. He's a real success story, brilliant visual artist. But he was sitting in his prison cell one night and there was a poster on the wall, and he just picked up a pencil and he decided to draw the poster. And he looked at his drawing and he looked at the poster and he thought, mine's is kind of better. And he was right. And I said to him, how did you not know that you didn't have that ability? And it was opportunity. Nobody had ever said to him that you could pick up a pen and draw something. And I think if art has been part of your life, it's hard to imagine your life without it. So if that ability is there, then there has to be opportunity to engage with it. I always think that if you took art out of prison, then it's 1984. It is the Orwellian world where everything is rewritten and structured in that way. So art gives color and gives expression and those kind of things, that are really important.
Very good. Thank you for that. I think I agree. So before we finish, if I maybe just come to you, Paul, first of all, just for maybe some closing remarks around, I guess, over the last hour, what we discussed and listened to. I'd just be interested to kind of get your thoughts.
Well, first of all, congratulations to all of those who were selected for this. I'm sure there's many others who weren't, who are doing equally good work. I mean, I think the attention to detail is very, very good in each case with each of these poems, and that's something to keep going forward if you want to continue writing. That concentration on the actual unique elements and details of your own journey are the things that really grab us as readers, and to perhaps reduce the abstract somewhat. And Pamela was touching on this in terms of rhyme and rhythm. Yes, that's one aspect of poetry, but there's many, many more aspects to poetry. So as a very wise soul once said to me, read broadly and then read deeply. So read as much as you can, and then when you find something that you love, that a poet you absolutely adore and connect with, read everything they've ever written and find out why you actually love that particular poet or that particular poem. So that would be advice going forward. But just keep doing what you're doing. You're doing it very well. It's great.
Excellent. Very good. And Pamela, just like, I guess, just as regards and speaking on behalf of prison arts and everything else, and the importance of the work that's going on, it's great to be able to amplify that, I think, as part of this festival. But it maybe just to get some of your thoughts about engaging with other groups and the power of that, I think would be really interesting as well.
Yeah, I think like the poems being part of your festival is a great testimony to just value and what prison arts do. I think it's it's not the easiest kind of environment to work in sometimes, but it's an environment where there's always huge rewards when you can see the transformation that arts can make within that environment. So I think prison arts definitely are an organization that I would like to see around for a long, long time. Yeah, and by supporting them, you're making sure that that happens, and also valuing the work that comes out of it. It's not always about somebody becoming the next greatest living poet. It's just about that act of expression and being able to self-reflect as well. It's a huge part of it.
Excellent. And what a lovely place to finish. So finally, just it leaves me just to thank both of you for your contributions today. A really stimulating conversation and very moving poetry, which of course is the most important thing. So thank you to Paul Modern, and thank you to Pamela Brown. Thanks everyone for tuning in to View today.
Thank you.
Cheerio.